All right, so I think we're going to get started. It is 12:05. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Stern. I'm a lead educator at Pearlstone, and I'm really glad that you're all here for Pearlstone's Shavuot Sojourn, a Jewish agricultural journey, a entire week dedicated to ancient grains, farming, and Jewish wisdom. Before we begin, we want to invite you to, if you feel comfortable, turn on your video so that we can get to know your face a little bit. And feel free in this space. This is a discussion space. So anytime you have a question or comment, feel free to either raise your hand or type your question right in the chat, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. Today, we will be talking with the wonderful Kadijah Spence. Our session is entitled Jewish Values and Environmental Education. Kadijah Spence is a graduate student at Bard College, studying environmental education and researching Jewish values in Jewish environmental education. During the process, she's met Jews of color, queer Jews, and female-identifying Jews who are thriving in the environmental field. When she's not researching the environment, she's in the environment, usually by a body of water. As a New Yorker, the Hudson River and its tributaries teach her so much and offer her a place to daydream. Kadijah will be in conversation with Rabbi Psachia Lichtenstein, the Director of Education at Pearlstone. So Psachia, do you want to lead us in?
Sure, thank you, Stern, and thank you, Sarah, for supporting the call as well. And I just want to remind everyone what Stern said, which is that you can put questions into the chat, and we hopefully this can be a full discussion. Let me see. Right now I'm seeing Stern, but is there a way that I could see? Is Kadijah pinned? Let's see. So, hi, Kadijah.
Hi.
It's so great to see you. I knew that we would be able to talk, and during the Jewish Farmer Network, where we met in person, even in the brief conversations that we had, I knew that this conversation could be very fruitful. So it's a real pleasure to have you here. One thing I wanted to ask you about your bio, water. So one of the things about Moshe, which, Moses, of the 5 books of Moses fame, his name, Moshe, for those who don't know, means one that is drawn out of water. So the Egyptian princess, she names him Moshe because she drew him out of the water. But the Kabbalah shares that actually the wisdom that you get from being involved with water and watching water and sort of what you learn from water is the wisdom that is drawn out from water. That's called Moshe. So like in nature, when you're studying water and you're appreciating its tributaries and the way it flows from the high place down to a low place, that learning and that sort of guidance that you draw out, that's called Moshe. That it's the wisdom drawn out from water. So I was wondering, what is your special relationship with water that you would put it into your bio?
Yeah, so I really feel at home when I'm like by a body of water. And it's interesting because I only recently learned how to swim, but like for me, it's not like the physical interaction of like being in water. It's just the presence of it and that there's so much life and things going on in the water. So my favorite place is to go down to the dock by Yonkers, the Yonkers Pier, and just sit. And you can see the goose, you can see the boats on the water. Sometimes there's like seagulls who want your like sandwich. And from that view, I get to see the Palisades. Sometimes when I go in the evening, I get to see the sunset. And then when I was at school at Bard, I was by the Saltkill River, and I learned a lot about the ecosystems that formed because of damming the different parts of the Saltkill River and the eel passage. And there's just a lot to learn from being near a body of water. And I appreciate that. So it's something I continue to do, whether it's for academic purpose or just to like have a spot to sit down for a while.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And speaking of your academic pursuits, we'd love to kind of get to know what you're doing in your research. And I know you prepared a presentation, so we'd love to like get to know a little bit more intimately what you're thinking about.
Yeah, so I'm gonna present for about less than 10 minutes. And anyone who wants the PowerPoint, I can send you a PDF of it. So for this portion of it, I'm just gonna focus on the interviews that I did with Jewish environmental educators from all over the US. And I started off with the list from the Hazon report and the Tilling the Field report, and reached out to members of two Jewish groups that I was a part of online, a Jewish women's group and a Jewish LGBT group, and just searched out for Jewish environmental educators out there that wanted to have a conversation with me. So, okay, let me see.
I just wanted to remind us that we are both in conversation with the people that are in the room, which we have a nice amount of participants, and on Facebook Live. And for people that are going to be tuning in later, which we already have people that have registered to be able to tune in later. Some might not be familiar with each one of the Jewish environmental and groups. So just Hazon is one of them, and Tilling the Field was maybe Kadijah, could you explain that one?
Yeah, so Tilling the Field surveyed Jewish community farms that were in the US, and they wanted to see how many participants came, what kind of programs that were run on the Jewish farms, and also what participants took from their experiences and the potential to grow Jewish environmental education on farms.
Thank you. Right before you jump into the work, how long have you been involved with the field?
So the environmental education field since college, so what is that, 6 years ago, I got involved in the environmental education field. And then while I was in college, my Hillel advisors and the rabbi that was at Manhattanville encouraged me to do environmental education programming. And so I learned a lot from the rabbi that was at Manhattanville about the role of nature in Judaism and how to bring that out in the programs that I wanted to run through Hillel. So then it was just like a fun thing to do. And then I got involved in the like actual field as like almost as a young professional when I started working at J-Team Leadership, which is also in Westchester, New York, to do programming with the teens around Jewish values, community service, and the environment, which started officially a couple months ago in October of last year. But I was doing one-off programs with them for about 2 years.
Thank you. So I guess now you have one last question before you present the work. I think one of the things that I find interesting is focusing on the Jewish values in tandem with environmental education, not just how do we teach or why do we teach, but the connection between those two. And why did you focus on that? What drew you to that?
So after many weeks of figuring out what to hone in on within Jewish environmental education, I decided on values because when I was looking at lesson plans from Hazon or Grow Torah, which is they do programming, Jewish environmental programming in Brooklyn, New York, and looking at some of the Jaffe Fellowship, which is the Jewish Environmental Education Fellowship program, looking at some of the sample curriculum they have online, I started to see a common thread of not only here are the things that you can do to live sustainably or make sustainable choices when you go to the grocery store or like the warehouse, but also here are the Jewish values from our culture that are related to these lessons. And this is one way that if you're not necessarily religiously practicing Judaism, here is one way that you can live that out in also living a sustainable lifestyle. So that's the reasoning behind specifically focusing on the Jewish values.
Thank you. I know in conversation with during FBEN, which is the farm-based education network for farm-based educators, I had a number of conversations with Christian farm-based educators, and they also talk about Christian values. And there was something about the way in which Jewish people use Jewish values in a different way than Christian values. Like, it's not necessarily a religious value, it's a value. Jews have a religion, but there's also Jewish values. And thank you for teasing that out.
Okay, so now I'm gonna share, here we go. Okay, let me minimize. There we go. Alrighty, so the full scope of what I'm looking at is curriculum and programming development in Jewish environmental education, focusing on enhancing the participants' experience with the inclusion of Jewish values. And so in order to do that, I focused in on what is the process of creating the curriculum and programs within Jewish environmental education. And then I also interviewed program managers, curriculum developers, and other staff members in Jewish environmental education organizations on how they decide which Jewish topics deepen which environmental topics. And so overall, I want to first say thank you to all of my interviewees and also the organizations that they work for. I was able to conduct 34 interviews representing 20 Jewish environmental education organizations within the US. And these are a few of the people that I talked to. So Sarah Chandler is the curriculum associate and garden educator at Grow Torah. Neely Simhai is the director of outdoor education at Abundance Farm. And Sasha Hippard is the young adults program associate at Urban Adama. So this is a list of all the organizations that I talked to. And I'll just quickly read them out loud to give them the recognition that they deserve. So that's Grow Torah, Camp Teva, Wilderness Torah, the Jewish Farm School, the Hazon Seal of Sustainability, Urban Adama, the Jaffe Fellowship, Abundance Farm, Coastal Roots Farm, Milk and Honey Farm, the Midbar Project, which is also a farm, the Amir, which is also a farm, Ekar Farm, Linkle Flagel, which is a Jewish queer chicken farm in upstate New York, Yesod Farm and Kitchen, Hazon, the Hazon organization as a whole, which I separated from the Hazon Seal of Sustainability, just because their programs run a little different. The Beacon Hebrew Alliance, which is a synagogue in Beacon, New York, the Isabella Friedman Retreat Center, the Pearlstone Center, Eden Village Camp, and then I also interviewed two rabbis. One is Rabbi Nina Beth Cardin, who is in Maryland working on environmental justice and social justice in the Maryland communities, and Rabbi Ishka Waldman, who is a rabbi and a Hebrew day school teacher in New Jersey. So these are all the questions that I asked the interviewees. I'm not going to read all of them, but I am just going to highlight a few. One being, which Jewish values are part of their organization's goals and missions? So seeing if there are specific ones that stuck out to the people and they really wanted to highlight in their overall goals and missions of their organization. How are the Jewish values incorporated into the environmental education lessons and plans? What draws people to work or volunteer at their organization? What draws people to come back? So that retention rate is really important because sometimes we get people through the door, but like what gets them to keep coming back? And most importantly, what do participants take away from the programs? So this is just a smaller list of Jewish values that I found were highlighted either in an organization's mission statement or repeated in their curriculum. And the one that I want to highlight is Shomrei Adama, which is keepers of the earth or guardians of the earth. And that's the one that shows up the most because in Genesis, when Adam and Eve were created, Adam got the command to till and take care of the earth. So this is the one that's highlighted the most because it's the one that was set from the beginning of the Torah in Genesis. And this is an example of how some of those Jewish values are used. So at Camp Teva, which is at the Isabella Friedman Center, Bal Tashlik, which is do not waste, is all about composting. So the students learn how to compost their meat scraps and their vegetable scraps, and also weigh their waste at the end of each meal and think about how to do portion control and when they're serving out their meals so that there is not waste at the end of their meal. So one thing I wanted to focus in on is the Jewish environmental education happening on farms, which is what the Till the Field was also focusing on. There's a lot of this going on, particularly on farms. And one thing that I found the reason why is because the Jewish calendar revolves around the holidays, and the holidays revolve around the kinds of food that are available during the calendar. So farms exemplify that above all other Jewish values. Is how do we celebrate the Jewish holidays while keeping in relation with the agricultural system that was set up. So this slide I'm gonna just leave here for a second, and just highlighting that Moedim are the Jewish holidays on the Jewish calendar. So collectively, that's what they're called. So two places that I want to highlight, and then we'll get back to our conversation, is Lincoln-Flagel, which is the Jewish queer farm, chicken farm in upstate New York. So this diagram here was made by Saul, and Saul is a farmer at Lincoln-Flagel, and these are the values that they are incorporating. Some of them are Jewish values and some of them are social justice values. And their focus is to get together on Rosh Chodesh and learn how to live off the land, pray while working on the land, learn from the land, and then eventually enjoy a meal from the land. So that is how they celebrate Rosh Chodesh at Lincoln-Flagel. And the other one is the Bear Midbar Project, which is in Arizona. And Micah is Moroccan in their background. And when it comes to the celebration of Mamuna, they highlighted that on their farm this past Passover and the Passover before that, to have an open community celebration where everyone can come and celebrate the ending of Passover. And traditionally in Morocco, they would have this celebration with all of their neighbors, including their Muslim neighbors, who would bring over the yeast and the bread and like the baked goods that Jews were not eating during Passover, and break bread together, which would symbolize like a new beginning, just as Passover is ending, it's the beginning of a new year. So debts would be forgiven. If the person was arguing, like they would start over. And just some benefits besides spiritual connection with nature. One thing I want to highlight is the fact that there are a lot of mentors within the Joppy field, and that is something that is continuing to grow within the Jewish environmental space, and that is why people come back to programs. So the retention of it is that people come back because they've made mentors, whether it's someone that they can hang out with on the weekend, someone who's interested in their research, or someone who can help them start their own environmental education program. So just a special thanks to Bard College, the CEP department, which I'm part of, Carolyn O'Malley, who's my advisor, the Jewish Farmers Network, and all the interviewees and participants of the surveys that I did.
Thank you, Kadijah.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if, just to let people know if there were particular questions about the work, could put them in the chat or raise your hand. Kadijah, one thing that I noticed about the presentation, and again, thank you, and thank you for doing that work. It was a wide scope of organizations. That was one of them. One thing I noticed is that you highlighted one of the farms, that the Rosh Chodesh and the Mimuna. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk more about why you highlighted those two in particular.
Yes, so Lincoln Flegel is one that I highlighted in particular because it's unique in its own place, just like the Midbar project is. So there's not another queer chicken farm in upstate New York. And there's not another Moroccan cultural based farm in Tucson, Arizona. So they're literally one of its kind, and that's why I chose to highlight it. I don't know if other people knew about it, but I didn't before I started the study. So I just wanted to give a special highlight to them to let people know that there can be an integration of identities while doing Jewish environmental education.
Did you find in the field, or I guess it's anecdotal, but that's all we can do as people have our own anecdotal. Did you find in the field a way of, let's say the best way to say it, that more opportunities for layering those identities within the Jewish environmental education community? Is it a place that is more welcoming or more challenging? And also, I was wondering if what strengths and challenges do you have as a Jew of color in your work that you're doing, both in this research and if you noticed, and then also just as your work as an educator, not in research?
Yeah, so they're in the environmental space overall, Jewish or not, there is definitely integration between identities when thinking about marginalized identities. I'm not sure why that is, but it's just, I guess one thing I could say is because the outdoors brings people together, and that is something that I've highlighted in my literature review, which I'm currently working on, which is just like a compilation of all the written research that is out there on environmental education and Jewish environmental education in particular. The outdoors brings people together, and it cuts down that barrier of like, oh, I don't feel safe in a particular space because I'm queer, because I'm a person of color, or because people might look down on me because I come from a middle class background. Like, it cuts out all of those barriers. We're just here to have fun and learn. So I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much integration and niche spaces that have been created. And then as far as myself, I do find that because I come from a middle class background, and I am a person of color, I tend to want to work with people who understand my background or are helping my own communities, and lifting them up and giving them these outdoor experiences, and field trips, and introducing them to new concepts. Because I had mentors who did that for me, and I want to do it for other people. And then as far as like struggles, I feel like burnout can come easily for me sometimes, where I just have to like take a break, because I like have that emotional reaction to hearing someone's story of like, yeah, I couldn't go to this really cool like after school program in a garden because I didn't have transportation, or I had to take care of a younger sibling. And I name in those moments like, okay, this is like taking like a slight emotional toll on me, and I'm like feeling this person's story, and sometimes I just name that out loud, and I feel like people appreciate that in a way, for me to just name it out loud and say, this is what I'm feeling, and like I understand where you're coming from. And just knowing that I have like a team behind me that's gonna like support me. Most of the times I am the only person of color there. So just knowing that when I can't necessarily show up as much as I would like to, that you're gonna like take over in that moment and continue for me while I like go take a break. Yeah.
I heard, just to reflect that, I heard that the outdoors part and like these are probably my words, nature connectedness or wilderness awareness or just the interactions with other beings sort of lends itself to a more open and environment. What about Jewish values? Do you feel like, because sometimes in conversation, I definitely there's definitely one way to see Jewish values, and maybe their particularism as sort of like as a hindrance to that, and then definitely I've heard, and I'm on I feel like that lends itself actually to that same connection and openness that nature has. And I was wondering if that was your experience, if you saw that in those values or not, or.
Yeah, so I feel like it's certain values that that really bring out that community and connection and breaks down the barriers. So I think Amuna is one of them. So at Camp Teva, there's a practice of just sitting and being in nature and just looking and meditating as a way to like refocus your energy, or if you're getting too much stimulation, like how to just calm down for a few seconds. And that one I think is beautiful because you're looking at yourself, you're looking at the things around you, and you're looking at the beauty of all that is around you. So that's one way that those values can be used as a way to connect. And then the general value of Kahila is community. So how do we gather community? We gather community by highlighting our our humanity and the skills that we bring and the differences that we bring. And I want to say highlighting the differences is important because in some of the curriculum, the Jewish values are taken in a perspective of, okay, here's someone coming from an Ashkenazi background. Here's what that Jewish value means to them. Here's someone coming from a Sephardic background. Here's what this value means to them and how they use it in their culture. So celebrating the differences to bring community together is another way.
One of the things I want to ask you is in what ways does it not lend itself? But before we do that, we have a question in the chat from Carolyn, which is the advocacy element to the two you highlighted? Is there an advocacy to the Lincoln-Flegel and the Midbar one?
Yeah, I think for me, there was, because there's a lot of, especially now during the quarantine time, a lot of my LGBTQ friends are really sad that they don't have a pride parade and that there's like nothing really going on online yet for June. And Lincoln-Flegel yesterday morning did a meditation and prayer session that they extended out to their wider LGBTQ community. So yeah, there is something that I want to highlight there. And then when it comes to the Midbar project, thinking about the Moroccan Jews and their customs, just highlighting that Jews come from all different cultures, and sometimes that is forgotten, and it's sad. So yeah, I did want to highlight that because, yeah.
I mean, one of the things that, for me, that resonates with environmental education, especially when you're teaching about ecology and teaching, is that Jews have been highly invested in so many different types of ecologies, right? So Mediterranean, Russian, a North African, and it just goes on, spread across the entire world. So the relationship with a particular ecology in ritual is centered around Eretz Yisrael, but in practice and in custom and it spans the entire globe, and really crosses pretty much every boundary. I wanted to call on, someone's raising their hand, and I want to point out that Neely, who was highlighted in your work, she's giving a session, and Tanhum is raising his hand, and he's also will be giving it will be in conversation coming up tomorrow, but during this program, and he also does a lot of research and work in this particular field. So, are you there?
Is my mic working? Can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Awesome. Hi, Kadijah. Thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed hearing what you had to say and seeing the breadth of your research. It's nice to always nice to see different organizations that I'm unaware of now coming into my scope of possibilities for further research. But I had maybe one comment and a question. The comment was connected to one of the values that you were highlighting, which was Shomrei Adama, and I guess I can connect it to a question, which is Ellen Bernstein's environmental organization, the first one, Shomrei Adama. How might you think that that the fact that you see that term popping up quite a bit is connected to the fact that that is the first Jewish environmental organization that that popped up. And now for the actual question that I was going to ask, is you presented this in terms of the realm of these are Jewish environmental education organizations, and I'm wondering if that's a label that you're applying to them, or that it's one of the ways in which they self-define as specifically focusing on education, because some of the names to me would have been a little bit surprising to see them specifically as this is our focus. We do environmental education or Jewish environmental education. So love to hear your thoughts about that. And maybe a follow-up question. I don't want to hog the floor, but only if you get to it. What might you expect? You had farms, you had other types of organizations. So you're looking to extract these Jewish values and create this mapping. Would you expect to find different values highlighted by particular types of organizations, or was this just cast your net into the sea of organizations and see what comes out, and because it's all important and interesting?
So to your second question, I labeled them as environmental education organizations just to have some consistency throughout my paper, throughout my data and materials section. And that is something that I do note, is that some of the places, particularly the farms, like that's not their main focus, but it is something that they do like heavily within their programs. And then the first question was about Shomrei Adamah. Yes, so I did include that in part of my introduction for my thesis research, that Ellen Bernstein had founded Shomrei Adamah, and that her work actually built up a network of Jewish environmental things. So when I say things, I mean like artists and educators and people who were including it in their teaching programs, people who were farmers who started making the connection between some of the practices that they were doing and some of the concepts that Ellen Bernstein highlighted. So yes, I did make that connection, and this wasn't my full PowerPoint, but in the beginning of my research PowerPoint, one of the things that my professor highlighted is to actually make that physical distinction between this is a Jewish value and this is also a Jewish environmental education organization, because it's not clear whether one is connected to the other because of the strong sense of to be a guardian of the earth, to be a keeper of the earth. I didn't find any articles on that. Like I said, I'm still in that lit review part of my research. So I don't know, I might. So to be continued on that question. And then the third question was, can you repeat it?
My microphone is issued about running out of battery here. My apologies for that. So I'm glad to sneak it in. The question is connected to what you perhaps were expecting to see in terms of any differentiation of values based on the type of organization you were looking at. Would you expect to find a particular type of value highlighted by farms versus other types of organizations? or was it just a general exercise of just mapping all the values that that you could find? Thank you.
So I in my data section, I actually do have two separate lists of Jewish values. One from non-farm organizations and one from the farm organization. And there is a bit of overlap, but the few that are unique to the farms are compassion to all creatures, and there's one about, and there's one about blessings. So saying a blessing before you do a particular activity, that is one that is highlighted on the farms. So they say a blessing before they start work, when they're taking a break, during the middle of the work session, and after the work session. So those are the two that I can remember off the top of my head. So there is a slight difference. Oh yes, and Baal Tashlik. Even though it's highlighted in some of the camps, there's a full on do not waste and composting and soil rejuvenation among the farms that don't exist in the smaller gardens or plots of land that other organizations might have. And there is a section on what the future may hold. I haven't gone through that data yet, so when I do, I can further have that conversation with you.
Was there one thing I'm curious about is, was there elements of your research that you were surprised that you didn't know before you started out, like that you didn't, when you were like, I know this field, let me do some research on them, or was there elements of it where it was like, well, actually that's kind of surprising, I didn't realize that that would be the case?
Okay, so yes, there are some elements that were surprising. One, the fact that Jewish educators don't really deviate from what is called like the standard list of Jewish values in their lessons, which is why some of the values were very similar between the farm and the non-farm organizations. And during the question of where do you see the future of Jewish environmental education, a lot of educators said, I really wish that we would go beyond those standard values. And some of those standard values are Shamrei Adamah, which is keepers of the earth, Baal Tashlik, do not waste, Emuna, which is awe of nature. Let's go beyond those, which I found quite interesting. Because I don't know who made that the standard. I didn't ask that question, but if I continue to do the research later on after this, I should ask that question, like who made those the standard, and why does everyone use them?
Well, I mean, one of the things that comes up for me is that those are the values that are so immediately and obviously in tandem and with a huge affinity with environmental ethics and values. So it's like, these are the most obvious. Mm-hmm. And that actually goes back to a previous question. I was like, well, which are the values that can't, that don't swim well with, when you're trying to layer both of these together, which are those values, like certain environmental values that just don't work as well in a Jewish setting, or certain Jewish values that don't swim as well together?
I feel like when it comes to The most that I've encountered is when it's come to food, and that's just because I had 8 farms listed there. So a new thing that was talked about is teaching campers who come to their program, even though they are teaching about sustainable foods and meats. One thing that I found highlighted throughout the farms is that there's not so much a focus of talking about eating kosher foods, but a focus of eating sustainable foods, which is interesting because being Jewish, one of the things is that you eat kosher. So I don't know if it's a conflict, but it's something that has come up that Jewish educators who are doing this work on farms have noticed that they're leaning towards teaching about sustainable eating rather than kosher eating. And I don't know how that affects the participants. But that is something that would be interesting to follow up on. And then the other one is thinking about social justice values, which sometimes appear in Jewish values. And the one that I can think of off the top of my head is love thy neighbor. So that's not necessarily an environmental value, but it is a Jewish value, and it does come up often in Jewish environmental spaces when they talk about cultural differences. So I wouldn't say it's a clash. I would just say that it's a recognition that there are other values out there that are not essentially environmental that are being taught in tandem with the environmental education programs. And an example of that I want to highlight is from the Beacon Hebrew Alliance, which is a synagogue in Beacon, New York, that they talked about charity and giving unto others, and how that relates back to, even though they might not necessarily be owning a farm and harvesting, what are other ways that they can give back to their community that is beneficial to the community besides food donations, which is what the go-to thing is if you don't have a farm, like donating canned goods.
Well, Kadijah, we're getting to close to our hour, and we can definitely stay on and have more of a question and answer afterwards. But I just wanted to be able to. One last question before Stern sort of concludes and lets it continue as well. Well, I have actually 2 questions. One is, and it's based off of you going around asking other people questions. And I was wondering, what is the question that you wish people asked you?
Ooh, that's a good one. I feel like it's not a question I wish I had people ask me, but something I wish they didn't allude to, which was like, it's now my responsibility to continue this work because it is so vast and there aren't a lot of academic papers written on it. And when I say academic, I mean like written through a college on Jewish environmental education. So I do feel the pressure of making sure that I include as much as possible. Um, but yeah, there isn't a question that I wish people asked me, because most of the questions that you ask me, especially about how I got started into this work, is something that people really wanted to know. And my answer was, I wanted to find a way to include something that is considered a niche topic in the academics and kind of highlight it and bring it up, which is something I do in my environmental research, because I think it's important to highlight the things that are not getting enough attention, which I think goes back to Carolyn's question of, is there an advocacy point in this? And just knowing that Jewish environmental education is more than just Jewish environmental education. Like, we're also touching on issues of cultural differences and adding in social justice and social rights and gender rights into the work that we're doing.
Yeah, there's so much there. I think there's another conversation to be had as well. And how can people get a hold of you online?
Oh yeah, so add me on Facebook, add me on LinkedIn, but also I'm going to put my personal email in the chat box, which is my first name and my last name. So KADIJAHSPENCE@gmail.com. And that's how you can reach out to me. And I am more than willing of sharing a PDF of my research when it's done. The only thing that's done at the moment is a compilation of all the interviews. So I actually went through all of them and wrote my data section already.
Thank you so much, Kadijah. And thank you also, Psachia. Thank you, Kadijah, for offering all of your work and information to the public. That's extremely generous. And thank everybody who joined us on our sojourn this afternoon. There are so many more speakers coming up this week. The next lecture that we're having in discussion is with Dave Boneline at 4 p.m. on permaculture and Shemitah ethics. You can register for this session and more anytime on Pearlstone's website at pearlstonecenter.org/Shavuot2020. And like many other nonprofit organizations during this time, Pearlstone is facing some kinds of financial hardships, and we're really hoping that if you feel able and if you're comfortable making a donation to help support us at this time. And you can find that on our website at pearlstonecenter.org/donate/donate online. And finally, if you enjoyed this session, please consider signing up for a network of people freely sharing seeds, ancient grains. It's called Hamotzi, Bread from the Earth. And it's in collaboration with Ellie Ragosa, one of the other speakers, the first speaker in our sojourn. And she's offering, and we are offering a lot of resources to the public, especially around growing ancient grains in your home and also potentially in JCCs or day school gardens. So if you're interested, we'll put the link in the chat. It's pearlstone.org/hamotzi. So with that, we'll formally conclude this session. So if anybody has some time constraints and need to log off, feel free to do that at this time. But we'll stay on for just like a couple more minutes and chat if anybody has any more questions. Thank you so much.
Stern, thank you. Kadijah, I also want to say that one of the things one of the values versus Jewish value, but not necessarily environmental value that you talked about, is actually centered around the session that's coming up with Dave, where he talks about permaculture values as really an ethic and a human value of like, it starts off trying to work with land differently, but then you arrive at, no, there's no real distinction between human culture and the way you're working with the land, that it ends up to be the same thing.
Mm.
Does anyone have questions, additional questions?
Yeah, I actually have a question. Kadijah, I think one of the things that keeps me coming back as a Jewish environmental educator myself is the experiences that I have with students and participants in programs. So I'm just wondering if there's any particular moment or memory or student or program that keeps you coming back to your work and keeps your work feeling alive.
Yeah, that's a good one. Love that one. So it's mainly because I work with children and teens, and just seeing that when I work with younger children, I can really bring out my creativity side, and like we can explore in the dirt, whether it's like soil that we bring inside or soil that like we can dig outside if there's a space to do that. And then with teens, I feel like my educator side really comes out, and we can like dive in and go deep with the topics that we're exploring. And then overall, I know, I really like sharing the knowledge of having learned something and then be able to teach others. And in general, with the environmental education, outside of it being Jewish environmental education or not, I really like to be outdoors. And even though sometimes I'm not outdoors, I'm still doing that environmental education work where I'm getting to know my area by looking at a map and focusing on where are water lines, what kind of, again with the water, what kind of like rivers and streams are flowing through, and what kind of like micro invertebrates are living in there, and like how can I go and explore this like piece of land. Yeah, so many components. I don't think there's just one. I think all of it together is what makes me really enjoy this work.
Yeah, how could there be just one? Thank you so much. I noticed that, I don't know if she's still here. Yeah, Zoe. Zoe posted a comment in the chat, I think in reference to cows and, or what was it? With kashrut and food.
Yeah.
She said, or Zoe said that I believe that pigs produce fewer greenhouse gases than ruminants do. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so that's one thing that I thought of too, even though like Jewish farms do not have pigs on them. But what the participants do with that information is a whole nother story, for the fact that it's focusing on sustainable meats and vegetables and not kosher meats and vegetables, or products in general. I did think about that. I don't know the like science or numbers behind pigs versus like cows or goats. But yeah, I could see that as a potential conflict. And then also, there are seafoods that are being produced where they're not produced from they're not like gathering the seafood from the ocean, but it's produced from a cell of like let's say a shrimp or a crab or a lobster. And like, is it kosher to eat? Probably not, because it's a derivative of the animal that like is not kosher. Yeah, so I think at that point it's all up to the person and how they want to follow their, like, how Jewish they want to be, or like how observant they want to be. Yeah, and even within being sustainable, sometimes like I'm dairy free, so I try to like avoid milk and cheese and yogurt and things like that. But when I do buy the vegan cheese, it's made with palm oil or sometimes it's canola oil.
Cashews.
Yeah, made with cashews. And those are not necessarily sustainable crops that the way that they're grown. So yeah,
or like harvested and processed.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So yes, food is a hot topic.
It's so true. I think Pasachia could probably tell you more about, or share in more detail, but from what I understood in Pearlstone's sort of like fledgling environmental education days, there was some talk about raising pigs on the farm for the exact reason that was mentioned in the chat, and because they are foragers. So they would have been like let loose in the forest to eat nuts and all this stuff. And I think there were a couple more reasons for it, but it was determined that it would be too much in conflict and it would cause too much of a hubbub in the Jewish community that Pearlstone was serving. So I think it was nixed to some people's unfortunate. Yeah, they were not super pleased with that. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about the burgers that are produced from the beef cells either. Not sure if that's kosher, even though beef is. Yeah, so there's some interesting things going on with food in the environmental world, and thinking about how to feed our population efficiently so that everyone gets food. Yeah.
Right.
Those values are definitely, there's definitely conflicts between each one of those values. But pretty much if you take, the way I see it is, if you take any value and you take that value to an extreme, it's going to start excluding other values, as long as it's, you won't let it be in relationship with other values. And the fact that a value has to be in relationship to another value doesn't necessarily mean that it's being ruined. It's just that it has to, like, you can't have a single value that's the only thing you care about. Like, you have to your values. So like, it's good for distinct populations of human beings to survive, not that everyone turns into a one blob of culture, and there's no differentiation. So one of the things of Jews is that they're not eating pigs, so that's actually could be understood as creating diversity, which is good on a like it's also an ecological value, rather than having like a monoculture for human beings. I know that the rabbis and various rabbis have many different opinions about how to handle that genetically modified food. So some some have already come out, yay, like this is the best stuff ever. It's good for halacha because now we can eat, because actually there's midrash in the Torah saying that at the time of Mashiach, in the utopian future, Jews will be able to eat pigs. So there it goes, like there it is. We can eat now. Like number one, it's like a religious value. Number two, it's better for the environment, right? Then that's like the ones that are on the like let's break every, like the new is always better field, and then there's the more reserved thinkers that are like this isn't great. This is an atrocity. Like a genetically modifying meat is it at its core goes against it. Like fine, there's no halacha against it, but at its very core it goes against everything the Torah is trying to teach us about connecting and being happy with nature and living with it. So there's the opposite pole, which is like a full-on halt, stop to that method.
So we've got a one last comment in the chat, and then I think we'll talk about it and then close out again from Zoe. An aspect of kashrut that relates to permaculture. If and this is great because it kind of leads into our next session later at 4 p.m. But if there's a justification for not boiling a kid in its mother's milk, if the justification is the inherent cruelty of the act, what other inherently cruel practices might be inconsistent with kashrut? For example, I will not eat veal because the calf is taken away from its mother and imprisoned in a small cage to preserve tenderness of the meat. So which permaculture practices might reduce cruelty to farm animals?
Okay, I have to take it in. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, I mean, any comment you might have on that? It doesn't, yeah.
Okay, so I can answer that question from a little bit of what I've learned from my professor at Bard, who is a professor and a sheep farm owner. So she has sheep on her farm and she lets them roam like free, and then she takes them to the local butcher and he butchers them, and then she sells the meat on her farm. So everything is in kind of like in a closed system way, but in a good way. Like she's not taking her business out to a big like slaughter factory company. She's doing it locally. So, and then when it comes to her sheep, she is the one who is feeding them and taking care of them and nurturing them, and caring for them. And I think it really goes into the saying, like, if you treat the cow happy before you slaughter it, then you can like taste the happiness in the meat. And like, it's weird to say, but that's like the thing among environmentalists to eat meat. And so I would say, like, in that particular practice, I don't know, I don't eat veal because like it's just expensive. But I would say that in the way of having the calf taken away from its mother, like that in itself is wouldn't be sustainable, because one, the calf would be like lonely and unhappy, and then like, are you just using the cow just to make more calves so you can have more veal? That's not sustainable either. So I would say it's really a decision for the caretaker of the animals to make, just as my professor is taking her own decisions to this is how she wants to take care of her sheep, and this is how she wants the cycle to be closed in within the community and economically to support the local butcher. So all of those things need to be taken into consideration. So I don't know of any particular permacultural practices, but that's what I can think of just as like a real life example that can be done.
Kadijah, I think it was really interesting that you pointed out that it's up to the person to make the decision. So that's like the choice that they're making. I know that many halachists have ruled that for kashrut. So when they're saying meat is kosher, they're saying they've decided that they don't give certification on all of the life and the choices that the person that raised them made. They're just giving kashrut on how it was slaughtered. So therefore, they feel like it's okay to give to say that veal is kosher, because what they're saying it was kosher slaughtered, and they're not commenting on the choices that were made by the person who was raising the animal earlier. There is a concept of eco-kosher, and which is that all the choices from the raising of the animal until it hits the plate need to be in accordance with like Jewish values and ethics. So if those choices were including like the payment of the person who took care of the animal, like their livelihood and how they were treated, and like from beginning to end, that if you're going to say that it's kosher, you need to say it's kosher for the entirety of the thing, and not really leave it up to the choice of the person that's raising the animal. One of the shames, sort of is actually veal. It's interesting that Zoe pointed that out. Veal is on its way out, but kosher veal is still around. It's like they're still doing that practice because it doesn't matter, because they're just saying that it was slaughtered kosher, not really the way it was raised. And so it's still there, even though it's actually like smacks in the face of treating animals. I also, we do need to wrap it up, but I do want to say one more thing about the pig question, which is that Jewish people can definitely raise pigs. There's an aversion to raising pigs for various reasons, and it's too long to get into. And there's a cultural dislike of pigs because the Roman legion that sacked Israel, at least this is the story, was a boar's head. That was its flag. So the pig ended up to be wrapped up with Rome and empire, and so it's like this like cultural aversion. But actually, raising a pig is the same as raising a horse or raising any non-kosher animal. It's not actually like and you can get benefit from raising pigs. You just can't eat them, so you leather and all that stuff. But it's so interesting. Zoe is pointing all these things out in these questions. But actually, mother's milk and a calf, that's something that you can't get any benefit from at all in halacha. You can't have anything to do with that thing. You can't sell it. You can't turn it into anything. It is completely taboo, as opposed to a pig, which you just can't eat pigs. You could have pet pigs and do it, there's cultural things, but there's not actually it's also interesting. And again, the permaculture, specifically at 4:00, Dave, we're going to be in conversation with Dave about permaculture and Jewish ethics, Shemitah ethics.
So I think this is a great time to wrap up. I can't say how much we all appreciate you coming in, Kadijah, and sharing your work so openly. And I appreciate everybody who joined us on the call today. We're gonna wrap it up, but we'll see everybody hopefully at 4 p.m. for Dave Boneline, his talk on permaculture and Shemitah ethics. So thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, Kadijah.
You're welcome.